The autumn morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Clarence's house as Charles walked slowly down the corridor, his mind heavy with the weight of recent events. At 74, he had finally ascended to the throne he had waited his entire life to inherit, yet the crown felt heavier than he had ever imagined it would. The transition from Prince of Wales to King had brought with it a cascade of responsibilities, ceremonies, and endless meetings that left him feeling more isolated than ever before. Camilla had been his anchor through it all, his queen consort, his partner of so many years, the woman who had stood by him through the darkest periods of his life. She understood him in ways that others never could, sharing his passions for environmental causes, architecture, and the quiet moments away from public scrutiny. Their love story had been unconventional, marked by years of separation, public scandal, and eventual triumph over adversity. Now, as they navigated their new roles together, Charles felt grateful for her steady presence beside him. But, lately, something had felt different. Camilla seemed distant, preoccupied with matters she didn't share with him. She spent long hours in her private study, emerging for official duties but retreating again as soon as possible. Her phone, which had once been a source of coordination between their busy schedules, now seemed to demand her attention at all hours. Charles noticed how she would excuse herself during conversations to take calls, stepping into another room with an urgency that puzzled him. He tried to dismiss his growing unease as the natural stress of their new positions. The coronation had been a magnificent affair, but the months following had been a whirlwind of state visits, charity patronages, and the complex machinery of constitutional monarchy. Perhaps Camilla was simply overwhelmed by the magnitude of her new role, just as he sometimes felt crushed by the expectations placed upon him. That particular morning, Charles had awakened early, as was his custom. He enjoyed the quiet hours before the palace came alive with staff and scheduled appointments. It was his time for reflection, for reading, for the solitude that had become increasingly precious since becoming king. Camilla was still sleeping when he rose, her face peaceful against the pale silk pillowcase. She had returned late the night before from what she had described as a charity meeting that had run longer than expected. As Charles made his way to the breakfast room, he noticed Camilla's phone on the small table in the hallway. She must have placed it there when she came in, perhaps too tired to remember to take it with her. The device sat silently, its black screen reflecting the morning light. Charles paused, looking at it with a mixture of curiosity and concern. It was unlike Camilla to be separated from her phone, especially given how important it had become to her daily routine. He continued to breakfast, expecting she would retrieve it soon enough. But, as the morning progressed, and Camilla remained in their bedroom, Charles found himself thinking about the phone. It wasn't that he wanted to invade her privacy, but there was something about her recent behavior that nagged at him. The secretive calls, the way she would quickly put the device away when he entered a room, the subtle but noticeable change in her demeanor over the past several weeks. Charles had always prided himself on being a trusting husband. His first marriage to Diana had been marked by suspicion and betrayal, wounds that had taken years to heal. With Camilla, he had found the security and faithfulness that had eluded him in his youth. She had proven her loyalty through decades of public scrutiny and personal sacrifice. The idea that she might be keeping something from him felt almost impossible to consider, yet the evidence of his own observations was becoming harder to ignore. The morning stretched on, filled with the usual succession of meetings and briefings. Charles met with his private secretary to review the day's schedule, approved several charitable patronages, and participated in a video call with environmental ministers about upcoming climate initiatives. Through it all, his mind kept drifting to Camilla's unusual behavior and the phone that still sat untouched in the hallway. During a break between appointments, Charles walked past the small table again. The phone remained exactly where it had been hours earlier. This was truly unusual, as Camilla typically checked her messages constantly throughout the day. He wondered if she had forgotten about it entirely or if she had other devices with her. The thought crossed his mind that perhaps something was wrong, that she might be ill or more stressed than she was letting on. As he stood there contemplating, the phone suddenly lit up with an incoming call. Charles glanced at the screen and saw a name he didn't recognize, Marcus Thompson. The phone continued to ring, its soft chime echoing in the quiet corridor. Charles hesitated, torn between answering it and respecting Camilla's privacy. The call went to voicemail, but within seconds, another call came through from the same number. The persistence of the caller troubled Charles. If this was business related to Camilla's royal duties, surely it would go through official channels. If it was personal, Why hadn't he heard of this Marcus Thompson before? In all their years together, Camilla had been open about her friendships and family connections. This name was completely unfamiliar to him. Charles found himself walking away from the phone, then returning to it again. His unease was growing, fed by a combination of genuine concern for Camilla and a creeping suspicion that something significant was being kept from him. He thought about their recent conversations, trying to remember if she had mentioned any new business associates or friends. Nothing came to mind. Her explanations for her absences had been vague, centered around general charitable work or meetings with organizations she had long supported. The third call from Marcus Thompson came just as Charles was preparing to leave for his next appointment. This time, he made a decision that would change everything. His finger hovered over the answer button for a moment, and then he pressed it. "Hello," Charles said quietly, his voice uncertain. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a man's voice that sounded surprised. "Camilla? You sound different. Are you all right?" Charles felt his heart skip a beat. The familiarity in the stranger's voice, the immediate use of his wife's first name, the concern that suggested an intimate knowledge of how she normally sounded, it all painted a picture that Charles wasn't prepared to see. "This isn't Camilla," Charles said carefully. "This is her husband." "Who is this?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Charles could hear the man's breathing on the other end, could almost feel the shock and panic that his words had caused. When Marcus Thompson finally spoke again, his voice was strained and uncertain. "Oh, I'm sorry. I must have the wrong number." "You called 3 times for Camilla," Charles said, his voice growing firmer. "I don't think you have the wrong number. I think you should explain who you are and why you're calling my wife so persistently." But the line had gone dead. Marcus Thompson had hung up, leaving Charles standing in the corridor with Camilla's phone in his hand and 1,000 questions racing through his mind. The device felt heavy with implications, with secrets that suddenly seemed to demand investigation. Charles looked at the phone screen, which showed the missed calls from Marcus Thompson. Below those, he could see notifications for text messages, some from the same unknown number. His finger traced over the screen, hovering above the messages. Every instinct told him to put the phone down, to wait for Camilla to wake up and ask her directly about this mysterious caller. But another part of him, the part that remembered the pain of his first marriage's deceptions, urged him to find out the truth now, before he could be blindsided again. The palace around him continued its quiet morning routine, staff members moving efficiently through their duties, unaware that their king was standing frozen in a corridor, holding what might be the key to understanding why his wife had become a stranger to him. The weight of the crown had never felt as heavy as it did in that moment, when Charles realized that the personal happiness he thought he had finally secured might be built on foundations far less solid than he had believed. As he stood there, wrestling with his conscience and his fears, Camilla's voice could be heard from their bedroom, calling his name. She was awake, and soon she would be looking for her phone. Charles had perhaps minutes to decide whether to confront her immediately with what he had discovered so far, or to delve deeper into the secrets that the device might reveal. The choice he made would determine not only the future of their marriage, but potentially the stability of the monarchy itself. Charles looked once more at the phone's screen, at the evidence of communications that had been hidden from him, and made a decision that would shatter the carefully constructed world he thought he knew. His finger moved across the screen, unlocking the device with a swipe. Camilla had never hidden her passcode from him, a fact that now seemed either tragically ironic or deliberately calculated. As the phone opened to reveal its contents, Charles prepared himself for discoveries that would test everything he believed about love, trust, and the woman he had thought he could never live without. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows of Clarence's house, but, for Charles, the day had already taken on the dark cast of revelations that would prove impossible to unsee. The phone in his hands held answers to questions he had been afraid to ask, and, as he began to explore its secrets, the foundations of his marriage began to crumble with each message he read. What Charles discovered in those first moments of investigation would haunt him for the rest of that day and many days to come. But, in that instant, standing in the corridor with Camilla's phone unlocked in his hands, he was still the king who had thought his queen was faithful, still the husband who believed in the love story that had sustained him through decades of public scrutiny. That innocence was about to end, replaced by a knowledge that would transform not only his understanding of his marriage, but his entire perception of the woman he had loved and trusted above all others. The phone's screen glowed with the promise of truth, and Charles began to read, unprepared for how completely that truth would destroy the life he thought he had built with Camilla. The first message he opened would change everything, setting in motion a series of discoveries that would test the very foundations of the monarchy and force Charles to confront the possibility that the greatest love story of his life had been, in reality, the greatest deception. That Charles's hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the text messages on Camilla's phone. The first few conversations seemed innocent enough: exchanges with her children, arrangements with palace staff, routine communications about charitable events. But, as he continued scrolling, Marcus Thompson's name appeared with increasing frequency, and the nature of their conversations became progressively more intimate and troubling. The earliest messages from Marcus dated back nearly 6 months, beginning just after the coronation. At first, they appeared to be professional in nature. Marcus Thompson, Charles learned from reading the exchanges, was a financial advisor who had been recommended to help Camilla manage some inherited properties from her late father. The initial conversations were formal, discussing investment strategies and property management. Nothing in those early messages would have raised any suspicions if Charles had seen them at the time. But, somewhere around the 3rd month, the tone began to shift. Marcus started including personal observations in his messages, commenting on Camilla's appearance during public engagements he had seen on television. He mentioned how beautiful she looked at various royal functions, how gracefully she carried herself, how impressed he was by her dedication to her charitable causes. Camilla's responses, which Charles read with growing alarm, did nothing to discourage these personal comments. Instead, she seemed to welcome them, even reciprocating with observations about Marcus's intelligence and understanding. Charles felt his chest tighten as he read a message from Marcus that said, "You look tired in today's photographs, Camilla. I worry that all this royal duty is taking a toll on you. You deserve someone who truly understands the pressure you're under." Camilla's response, sent just an hour later, read, "You're so perceptive, Marcus. Sometimes I feel like no one else really sees what this life costs me." The implications of that exchange hit Charles like a physical blow. He was the one person who should understand the pressures of royal life better than anyone else. He had lived with those pressures his entire life, had been shaped by them, had found in Camilla someone who understood his struggles. To read that she felt unseen and misunderstood by him, that she was sharing these feelings with a virtual stranger, was devastating. As Charles continued reading, the messages became increasingly personal. Marcus began sharing details about his own life, his divorce from his wife of 20 years, his feelings of loneliness despite his financial success, his admiration for Camilla's strength in rebuilding her life after her own divorce from Andrew Parker Bowles. The parallels between their situations seemed to create a bond that grew stronger with each exchange. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," one message from Marcus read. "You're remarkable, Camilla. You've created something beautiful from difficult circumstances. Your first husband never deserved you, and I sometimes wonder if anyone truly appreciates the incredible woman you've become." Camilla's response was immediate. "You make me feel seen in a way I haven't felt in years. Sometimes I wonder what my life might have been like if I had met someone like you instead of making the choices I made." Charles had to stop reading for a moment. The reference to her life choices could only mean her decision to marry him, to become queen consort, to share the burden of the crown. To read that she regretted those choices, that she fantasized about an alternative life with another man, was almost unbearable. But there was more, so much more. As the weeks progressed in the message timeline, Marcus and Camilla began arranging meetings. These weren't the charity meetings Camilla had described to Charles. They were private lunches at discreet restaurants, walks in parks where they were unlikely to be recognized, even visits to Marcus's private office after hours. Each meeting was planned with the careful secrecy of an affair, with coded language and elaborate alibis. Tuesday afternoon at the usual place? Marcus would text, and Camilla would respond with simple confirmations or suggestions for alternative times. Charles realized that charity meetings that ran late, unexpected errands that took longer than anticipated, and various other explanations Camilla had offered for her absences were all lies designed to hide these clandestine meetings. The most damning evidence came in messages from just the week before. Marcus had written, "I can't stop thinking about yesterday, about holding you in my arms. You felt so right there, Camilla. I know the situation is complicated, but what we have is real. It's more real than anything I've ever felt before." Camilla's response was immediate and unequivocal. "I feel the same way, darling. Being with you makes me remember who I am when I'm not playing the role of queen. You see me, the real me, not the title or the obligation." I love you too, Marcus. More than I should, more than is wise, but I can't help myself. Charles felt the world tilt around him as he read those words. I love you too, Marcus. The casualness of it, the way it was written as if she had said it before, suggested that their relationship had progressed far beyond emotional infidelity. This was a full romantic relationship, complete with declarations of love and physical intimacy. His mind raced back through recent weeks, searching for clues he had missed. Camilla's increased attention to her appearance, her new perfume, the way she had been more distant during their intimate moments together. He remembered how she had started taking longer showers when she returned from her mysterious appointments, and how she had become protective of her phone in a way that was completely out of character for her. The messages continued, revealing plans for Marcus to accompany Camilla on an upcoming trip to Scotland that she had told Charles was a solo retreat to visit old friends. They discussed how they would spend their days together, walking through the countryside, staying at a small inn where Marcus had made reservations under false names. The intimacy of their planning, the way they discussed their future together, suggested a relationship that had been developing for months, while Charles remained completely unaware. I dream about leaving all this behind sometimes, Camilla had written to Marcus just days earlier. Running away with you to somewhere we could just be ourselves, without the weight of expectation and duty. You make me feel young again, Marcus. You make me feel like anything is possible. Marcus's response was equally revealing. I would give up everything for you, Camilla. My business, my house, everything. We could start over somewhere new, somewhere no one knows who you are or what you're supposed to be. Just think of it. No more royal duties, no more living in someone else's shadow, no more pretending to be happy when you're not. The reference to living in someone else's shadow and pretending to be happy made it clear that Marcus viewed Charles not just as an obstacle to his relationship with Camilla, but as someone who was actively making her miserable. The fact that Camilla had shared such intimate details about her marriage, had apparently portrayed Charles as a source of unhappiness in her life, felt like the deepest betrayal of all. Charles set the phone down on the table, his hands shaking too badly to continue reading. The magnitude of Camilla's deception was overwhelming. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a friendship that had crossed boundaries. This was a carefully planned, deliberately concealed affair that had been going on for months. She had been living a double life, expressing love and commitment to Marcus while maintaining the facade of a happy marriage with Charles. The sound of footsteps in the corridor alerted Charles to someone's approach. He quickly picked up the phone again, uncertain whether to confront Camilla immediately or to continue investigating. His mind was reeling from what he had discovered, but he sensed there might be more to learn, more evidence that would help him understand the full scope of her betrayal. Charles, darling? Have you seen my phone? Camilla's voice carried down the corridor. She was awake and looking for the device that contained all the evidence of her affair. I'll be right there, Charles called back, his voice somehow steady despite the turmoil in his chest. He made a quick decision to photograph some of the most damaging messages with his own phone before returning hers. The evidence was too important to risk losing, and he suspected that once Camilla realized he might have seen her messages, she would take steps to destroy them. Working quickly, Charles captured screenshots of the most intimate exchanges between Camilla and Marcus, including their declarations of love, their meeting arrangements, and their plans for the Scotland trip. Each image he saved felt like another nail in the coffin of his marriage, but he knew he needed proof of what he had discovered. Charles, is everything all right? Camilla's voice was closer now, tinged with the slight concern that suggested she was wondering why he hadn't responded immediately to her call. Yes, just finishing up some correspondence, Charles replied, closing the message app on her phone and walking toward their bedroom. As he approached, he could see Camilla standing in the doorway, dressed in her silk robe, her hair still tousled from sleep. She looked beautiful, exactly as she had every morning for years, and the normalcy of the scene made the enormity of what he had discovered feel even more surreal. Have you seen my phone, darling? She asked again, reaching up to kiss his cheek as he approached. The casual affection of the gesture felt like mockery now that Charles knew she had been sharing such intimacies with another man. It was in the corridor, Charles said, handing her the device. You must have left it there when you came in last night. You were quite late. How did your meeting go? Camilla took the phone, her fingers briefly touching his as she did so. Charles watched her face carefully, looking for any sign that she suspected he might have accessed her messages. But her expression remained perfectly composed, showing nothing but the mild relief of someone who had found a misplaced possession. Oh, you know how these charity events can be, Camilla said with a wave of her hand. Lots of passionate people with strong opinions about how to proceed. The time just got away from us. I should have called to let you know I'd be late, but I didn't want to disturb you. The ease with which she lied was almost as shocking as the affair itself. There had been no charity meeting the night before. Charles now knew that she had been with Marcus Thompson, probably in his arms, telling him how much she loved him while her husband waited at home, unaware that his marriage was disintegrating around him. I'm sure it was worthwhile work, Charles said carefully. These causes you support are so important to you. I admire your dedication. Camilla smiled, seemingly pleased by his praise. Thank you, darling. It means so much to have your support in all of this. I know my schedule has been rather demanding lately, and I appreciate your patience. Charles nodded, studying her face as she spoke. The woman standing before him looked exactly like the Camilla he had loved and trusted for so many years, but now he saw her through completely different eyes. Every word she spoke carried the weight of deception. Every casual endearment felt like a calculated manipulation. The life they had built together, which just an hour ago had seemed solid and real, now appeared to be nothing more than an elaborate performance she was putting on while she conducted her real relationship with someone else. As Camilla moved past him into their bedroom, checking her phone for messages, Charles felt a cold certainty settle over him. The woman he had married, the love story he had believed in, the partnership that was supposed to sustain him through the challenges of being king, all of it had been built on a foundation of lies that was now crumbling beneath his feet. The most devastating realization was that he still loved her. Despite everything he had learned, despite the betrayal and the deception, his heart hadn't yet caught up with his mind. He still felt the impulse to protect her, to find some way to repair what had been broken. But, as he watched Camilla checking her messages, probably reading new communications from Marcus that had arrived while Charles held her phone, he understood that the woman he loved no longer existed, if she ever had at all. The day ahead loomed before him, filled with official duties and public appearances that would require him to pretend that his world hadn't just collapsed. He would have to smile and wave, make speeches and attend meetings, all while processing the knowledge that his marriage was a sham and his queen consort was in love with another man. Charles took a deep breath, steeling himself for the performance that the rest of his life would now require. The next several days passed in a surreal haze for Charles. He moved through his royal duties like an actor playing a familiar role, smiling for photographs, delivering speeches, and conducting meetings while his mind remained consumed by the devastating knowledge of Camilla's betrayal. The screenshots he had taken from her phone burned in his memory, each intimate message between her and Marcus Thompson replaying in his thoughts during quiet moments. Charles found himself studying Camilla with new eyes, watching for signs of her deception that he had previously missed. The way she would excuse herself to take phone calls, stepping into another room with a brightness in her voice that he now realized was reserved for Marcus. The care she took with her appearance before leaving for her mysterious appointments, the subtle changes in her perfume and clothing choices that he had attributed to her evolving sense of style as queen consort. Most painfully, Charles began to recognize the distance that had crept into their intimate moments. Camilla's responses to his affection had become perfunctory, going through the motions of a loving wife while her heart and mind were clearly elsewhere. The passion they had once shared, the deep connection that had sustained them through decades of public scrutiny, had been replaced by a hollow performance that Charles now understood was masking her true feelings for another man. 3 days after his discovery, Charles made a decision that would push him deeper into the nightmare that his marriage had become. He contacted his most trusted private investigator, Sir Richard Henley, a discreet professional who had served the royal family for over 2 decades. If Charles was going to confront Camilla with her betrayal, he needed to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with. "I need you to investigate someone for me," Charles told Sir Richard during a private meeting in his study. "Marcus Thompson. I believe he's a financial advisor, but I need to know everything about him. His background, his business dealings, his personal life. Everything." Sir Richard, a man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, nodded without asking for details. His years of service to the royal family had taught him when questions were appropriate, and when discretion was more valuable than curiosity. "How quickly do you need this information, Your Majesty?" "As soon as possible," Charles replied. "This is a matter of utmost urgency and confidentiality." Within 48 hours, Sir Richard returned with a comprehensive dossier that revealed Marcus Thompson to be a far more complicated figure than Charles had expected. Thompson was indeed a financial advisor, but his client list included several individuals with questionable reputations, including foreign nationals who were suspected of using British investment firms to launder money. More troubling still, Thompson had a history of targeting wealthy, vulnerable women, building intimate relationships that he then leveraged for financial and social gain. The investigative report included photographs of Thompson with previous clients who had become romantically involved with him. There was Elizabeth Hartwell, a widow who had lost millions to Thompson's investment schemes before discovering his relationship with her was purely transactional. There was Margaret Sinclair, a divorcee who had given Thompson access to her social circle and business connections before he disappeared with a significant portion of her inheritance. The pattern was clear and devastating. Marcus Thompson was a predator who specialized in seducing women in positions of wealth and influence, extracting what he could from them before moving on to his next target. The realization that Camilla had become his latest victim added a layer of complexity to Charles's anger and hurt. She wasn't just betraying their marriage. She was being manipulated by a man who saw her as nothing more than the ultimate prize in his career of romantic fraud. Armed with this information, Charles began to plan his confrontation with Camilla. But before he could act, events took an unexpected turn that brought the crisis to a head sooner than he had anticipated. On a Thursday afternoon, as Charles was reviewing state papers in his private office, his secretary informed him that Marcus Thompson had arrived at Clarence House, requesting an immediate meeting with the king. The audacity of the request was staggering, but Charles realized that this might be the perfect opportunity to confront his wife's lover directly and understand exactly what was happening to his marriage. "Send him in," Charles instructed, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. Marcus Thompson was not what Charles had expected. Instead of the suave, sophisticated manipulator he had imagined, Thompson appeared nervous and disheveled. He was a man in his early 50s, well-dressed but with the slightly desperate look of someone who had been cornered. When he entered Charles's office, his hands were visibly shaking, and he seemed to struggle with how to begin the conversation. "Your Majesty," Thompson began, his voice uncertain. "I know this is highly irregular, but I felt I had no choice but to come to you directly. There are things you need to know about your wife, things that I fear will cause you great pain if you discover them in any other way." Charles remained seated behind his desk, his expression carefully controlled. "I'm listening, Mr. Thompson. I want you to know that I never intended for things to go as far as they have," Thompson continued, seeming to gain confidence as he spoke. "When I first met Camilla, it was purely professional. She needed financial advice regarding some inherited properties, and I was recommended by a mutual acquaintance. But over the months, we developed a friendship that gradually became something more." The casual way Thompson spoke about his relationship with Camilla, as if it were a natural progression rather than a betrayal of sacred vows, inflamed Charles's anger. But he forced himself to remain silent, allowing Thompson to continue with his explanation. "I realize now that I was naive about the implications of becoming involved with someone in Camilla's position," Thompson said. "The secrecy, the careful planning required for us to meet, the impact on her marriage to you. I didn't fully consider how complicated and painful this would become for everyone involved." "How considerate of you to have such belated concerns," Charles said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, Mr. Thompson, what exactly brings you to my office today? Are you here to confess your sins, to ask for my forgiveness, or simply to gloat about your conquest of my wife?" Thompson's face reddened at Charles's words, but he pressed on with his explanation. "I'm here because Camilla is planning to leave you, Your Majesty. She's been building up to it for weeks, trying to find the courage to ask for a divorce. She wants to marry me and start a new life away from all the pressures and expectations of royal duty." The words hit Charles like physical blows. Divorce, remarriage, the complete destruction of everything they had built together. He thought of the messages he had read on Camilla's phone, her fantasies about running away with Marcus, starting over somewhere new. Those weren't idle daydreams. They were actual plans being put into motion. "She's been consulting with lawyers," Thompson continued, apparently interpreting Charles's silence as permission to continue. "She's trying to understand what the process would look like, what kind of settlement she might expect, how the public announcement would be handled. She's serious about this, Your Majesty. This isn't just an affair that will burn itself out. She loves me, and she wants to build a life with me." Charles felt the last vestiges of hope for his marriage crumble as Thompson spoke. The possibility that Camilla's affair was merely a temporary lapse in judgment, something they might work through together, vanished completely. This was a woman who had made calculated decisions to betray their marriage, to consult lawyers behind his back, to plan a future that didn't include him. "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Thompson?" Charles asked, his voice deadly quiet. "What does a financial advisor with a questionable client list gain from marrying the former Queen Consort of England?" Thompson's expression shifted, becoming defensive. "I don't know what you're implying, Your Majesty, but my feelings for Camilla are genuine. Yes, I've had business difficulties in the past, but that has nothing to do with my relationship with your wife. I love her for who she is, not for her title or her wealth." Charles reached into his desk drawer and withdrew the investigative report that Sir Richard had provided. He placed it on the desk between them, opening it to reveal photographs of Thompson with his previous victims, Elizabeth Hartwell, Margaret Sinclair, and several others. "Elizabeth Hartwell lost £4 million to your investment schemes," Charles said, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "Margaret Sinclair gave you access to her business connections and social circle before you disappeared with half her inheritance. There are 6 other women documented in this report, all of whom fell victim to your particular brand of romantic fraud. And now you expect me to believe that your relationship with my wife is somehow different, somehow genuine." Thompson's face went pale as he looked at the photographs and documents spread before him. For a moment, his confident demeanor faltered completely, revealing the calculating predator beneath the facade of the loving suitor. "I don't know where you got this information," Thompson said finally, "but those situations were completely different. Yes, some of my business dealings haven't worked out as planned, but that doesn't change the fact that I love Camilla and she loves me." "Love," Charles repeated, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. "Is that what you call it when you manipulate vulnerable women into believing you care for them while you systematically exploit their wealth and position? Is that what you've convinced my wife to believe about your feelings for her?" Thompson stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "You don't understand what Camilla has been going through, living in your shadow, playing a role that was never meant for her. She's been miserable for years, trapped in a marriage that serves your needs but ignores hers. I've given her something you never could, the feeling of being truly seen and valued for herself, not as an accessory to your crown." The accusation struck deep, touching on Charles's own fears about their marriage. Had he been so consumed with his royal duties that he had failed to see Camilla's unhappiness? Had he taken her love and support for granted while she suffered in silence? The possibility that Thompson's words contained a grain of truth made them even more painful to hear. "If Camilla has been unhappy, she should have spoken to me about it," Charles said, struggling to maintain his composure. "Marriage is about working through difficulties together, not running away with the first man who offers false promises of an easier life." "False promises?" Thompson's voice rose. "I've offered her freedom, Your Majesty. Freedom from the constant scrutiny, from the endless duties and obligations, from having to pretend to be someone she's not. You've given her a crown, but I've given her back herself." Charles stood up, his patience finally exhausted. "You've given her nothing but lies and manipulation, Mr. Thompson. You're a predator who preys on wealthy, vulnerable women, and I won't allow you to destroy my wife's life the way you've destroyed so many others." "It's too late for that," Thompson said, backing toward the door. "Camilla has already made her choice. She's planning to announce her intention to divorce you within the week. Nothing you can do or say will change that. She's finally found the courage to choose love over duty, and I won't let you or anyone else take that away from her." As Thompson reached for the door handle, he turned back to Charles with a look of smug satisfaction. "You might want to prepare yourself, Your Majesty. When this story breaks, when the world learns that your queen consort is leaving you for another man, it's going to cause quite a scandal. I hope the monarchy is ready for that kind of publicity." With those words, Marcus Thompson left Charles's office, leaving the king alone with the devastating knowledge that his marriage was about to become a public spectacle that would rock the very foundations of the British monarchy. Charles sank back into his chair, his mind reeling from the confrontation and the implications of everything he had learned. The man who had seduced his wife was a career criminal, a predator who had targeted Camilla as his ultimate victim. But even more devastating was the realization that Camilla had been planning her escape for weeks, consulting lawyers, and preparing to abandon their marriage without even attempting to discuss her unhappiness with Charles himself. As Charles sat alone in his office, surrounded by the trappings of power and authority that now felt meaningless, he realized that the worst was yet to come. The confrontation with Thompson had been just the beginning. Now he would have to face Camilla herself, armed with the knowledge of her betrayal and her plans to leave him. The conversation that awaited them would determine not just the fate of their marriage, but the future of the monarchy itself. Charles spent the remainder of that afternoon in his study, staring out the window at the garden where he and Camilla had walked together countless times over the years. Each memory now felt tainted by the knowledge of her deception, every shared moment recontextualized by the understanding that she had been planning her escape while pretending to be his loving partner. The weight of what he would have to confront her with felt almost unbearable, yet he knew that avoiding the truth would only prolong the agony for both of them. When Camilla returned to Clarence's house that evening, she appeared to be in unusually high spirits. Charles watched her from the doorway of his study as she greeted the staff, her voice bright and animated in a way it hadn't been for months. She was carrying flowers that she claimed to have purchased for their dinner table, but Charles couldn't help wondering if they had been a gift from Marcus Thompson during another of their secret meetings. "Charles, darling," Camilla called out as she noticed him watching her. "You look quite serious today. Is everything all right?" The casual concern in her voice might once have touched his heart, but now it felt like another performance in the elaborate deception she had been maintaining. Charles forced himself to smile as he approached her, noting how she unconsciously moved her phone to her opposite hand when he drew near, as if protecting it from his view. "I had an interesting visitor today," Charles said carefully, studying her face for any reaction. "A Mr. Marcus Thompson came to see me." The flowers in Camilla's hands trembled slightly, and Charles saw a flash of panic cross her features before she quickly composed herself. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but he could hear the effort it took to maintain that control. "Marcus Thompson? I'm not sure I know who you mean. What did he want?" The lie came so easily to her lips that Charles felt a fresh wave of grief for the woman he thought he had known. Even confronted with evidence that her secret had been exposed, she was still attempting to maintain the facade that had been crumbling around them for months. "He wanted to discuss your plans for divorce," Charles said quietly. "He seemed quite confident that you would be asking me for one very soon." Camilla set the flowers down on a nearby table, her movements carefully controlled. Charles could see her mind racing, trying to determine how much he knew and what her next move should be. When she looked at him again, her expression had shifted from surprise to something that looked almost like relief. "I suppose there's no point in pretending anymore," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you known?" "I've suspected something was wrong for weeks," Charles replied. "But I didn't know the full extent of it until I found your phone the other morning and saw your messages with him." Camilla's face went pale. "You read my private messages?" "I answered your phone when he called," Charles said. "The rest followed from there." "Camilla, how could you do this? How could you build an entire relationship with another man while sharing our bed, our life, our crown?" For a moment, Camilla seemed to struggle with how to respond. When she finally spoke, her words carried a weight of sadness that caught Charles off guard despite everything he now knew about her betrayal. "Because I've been dying, Charles. Dying inside, day by day, year by year, until I barely recognized myself anymore. Do you have any idea what it's like to live your entire life in service to someone else's dreams, someone else's destiny, someone else's happiness?" Charles felt as if she had slapped him. "Someone else's dreams? Camilla, everything we've built together has been our dream. The life we planned, the partnership we created, the love we declared before God, and the world. That was supposed to be our shared future." "Your future," Camilla corrected, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "I became part of your future, Charles, but somewhere along the way, I lost any sense of what my own future might look like. I became the wife of the future king, then the wife of the king, then queen consort. But when did I stop being simply Camilla? When did my own wants and needs become completely irrelevant to the life I was living?" Charles struggled to process her words. There was genuine pain in her voice, real anguish that spoke to years of unhappiness he had somehow failed to see. But even if her feelings were genuine, they didn't excuse the betrayal, the lies, the deliberate deception that had characterized their relationship for months. "If you were unhappy, you should have talked to me," Charles said. "We could have worked through it together. We could have found ways to make your life more fulfilling without destroying our marriage in the process." Camilla laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Worked through it together? Charles, when was the last time we had a conversation about anything that wasn't related to your schedule, your duties, your concerns as king? When was the last time you asked me what I wanted, what I dreamed about, what I needed to feel truly alive?" The accusation stung because Charles could see the truth in it. His ascension to the throne had consumed his attention so completely that he had taken Camilla's support and understanding for granted. He had assumed that her happiness was bound up with his own, that serving the crown alongside him would be fulfilling enough for both of them. I know I've been preoccupied with my new role, Charles admitted. But that doesn't justify what you've done. It doesn't excuse the affair, the lies, the planning to leave our marriage without even attempting to discuss your feelings with me first. Discuss my feelings? Camilla's voice rose with frustration. Charles, I've tried to discuss my feelings with you countless times over the past year. Every time I mentioned feeling overwhelmed by royal duties, you told me I was doing wonderfully and that it would get easier with time. Every time I suggested we needed more private time together, you explained why that was impossible given our schedules. Every time I tried to talk about feeling lost in all the protocol and expectation, you reassured me that I was exactly where I belonged. Charles felt the ground shifting beneath him as he realized that what he had interpreted as support and encouragement, Camilla had experienced as dismissal and misunderstanding. His attempts to help her adjust to royal life had actually been preventing her from expressing her genuine struggles and unhappiness. I was trying to help, Charles said weakly. I thought I was being supportive. You were being supportive of the role you needed me to play, Camilla replied. But you weren't hearing what I was actually saying to you. You weren't seeing how much I was struggling to maintain that role while losing more of myself every day. Charles sank into a nearby chair, feeling the full weight of his failures as a husband settling over him. But even as he acknowledged his shortcomings, he couldn't accept that they justified the path Camilla had chosen. Even if I failed you as a husband, Charles said, that doesn't make what you've done with Marcus Thompson right. You've been lying to me for months, conducting a full romantic relationship while pretending to love me. And now I discover that the man you've chosen is a career criminal who preys on wealthy women. How can you not see that you're being manipulated? Camilla's expression hardened at his words. Marcus isn't manipulating me, Charles. He's the first person in years who has seen me as a complete human being rather than just an appendage to your crown. Yes, he has a complicated past, but so do we all. What matters is how he treats me, how he makes me feel, and the future he's offering me. The future he's offering you is built on lies, Charles said, his voice rising despite his efforts to remain calm. I've had him investigated, Camilla. He's done this before, with multiple women. He builds romantic relationships to gain access to their wealth and social positions, then disappears when he's gotten what he wants from them. I don't believe that, Camilla said firmly. I know Marcus, Charles. I know his heart, his genuine feelings for me. You're trying to discredit him because you can't accept that he's given me something you never could. Charles pulled out his phone and showed her the screenshots he had taken of her messages with Marcus, along with some of the evidence from Sir Richard's investigation. Look at these other women, Camilla. Look at the pattern. Elizabeth Hartwell, Margaret Sinclair, they all believed they knew his heart too. They all thought their relationships with him were genuine and special. They all discovered too late that they were just marks in a long-running con. Camilla glanced at the evidence, but quickly looked away, her jaw set in stubborn resistance. Those situations were different. Marcus explained about his business difficulties, about the women who misunderstood the nature of their relationships with him. What we have is real, Charles. I know the difference. Charles felt a surge of desperation as he realized that Camilla was so invested in her fantasy of Marcus Thompson that she couldn't see the obvious truth about his character and intentions. She had built her escape from their marriage around a man who saw her as nothing more than his biggest score, and she was choosing to ignore all evidence to the contrary. Camilla, please, Charles said, his voice breaking with emotion. I know I failed you in many ways. I know I haven't been the husband you needed, especially since becoming king. But this man is going to destroy you. He'll take whatever he can get from you and then move on to his next victim. Don't throw away everything we've built together for someone who doesn't genuinely love you. For a moment, Charles thought he saw uncertainty flicker in Camilla's eyes. But then her expression hardened again, and he realized that she had made her choice long before this conversation began. It's too late, Charles, she said quietly. I've already contacted lawyers about starting divorce proceedings. I can't continue living this life, pretending to be someone I'm not, sacrificing my own happiness for duty and obligation. Marcus offers me a chance to remember who I really am underneath all the titles and expectations. And what about the monarchy? Charles asked. What about the scandal this will cause, the damage it will do to the institution we've spent our lives serving? Camilla met his eyes steadily. The monarchy will survive, Charles. It always has. But I won't survive much longer if I continue living this life. I'm sorry for the pain this will cause you and for the damage it may do to your reign. But I have to choose myself this time. I have to choose love over duty, even if that love leads to uncertainty and difficulty. As Charles listened to her final words, he realized that their marriage was truly over. The woman standing before him was determined to pursue a future with Marcus Thompson, despite all evidence that he was a manipulative criminal who would eventually betray her trust. She had chosen romantic fantasy over practical reality, passion over stability, and the promise of personal fulfillment over the partnership they had built together. The conversation that Charles had dreaded was ending exactly as he had feared it would. Camilla was leaving him. The monarchy was about to face one of its greatest scandals in modern history, and the love story that had sustained him through decades of public scrutiny was revealed to have been an illusion that had finally crumbled under the weight of truth. As Camilla walked away from him that evening, Charles understood that he would now have to face the future alone, carrying the burden of the crown without the partner who had promised to share that weight with him. The loneliness he had always feared would now become his reality, and the greatest challenge of his reign would be finding a way to serve his people while his personal life collapsed in the most public and humiliating way possible. The woman he had loved, trusted, and depended upon was about to become the greatest threat to everything he held dear, and there was nothing he could do to stop her from destroying them both in her pursuit of a happiness that would prove to be as false as the love that had once bound them together. 3 months after that devastating conversation, Charles stood at the window of his private study watching the autumn rain cascade down the glass, each droplet reflecting the fragments of light from the palace chandelier. The divorce proceedings had been finalized just 2 weeks earlier, conducted with as much discretion as possible, but still generating the kind of international media frenzy that Charles had dreaded. The headlines had been brutal. Queen consort abandons crown for love. Royal marriage crumbles after affair. The king's greatest heartbreak. The official statement released by Buckingham Palace had been carefully crafted to minimize damage to the monarchy while acknowledging the end of the marriage. It spoke of irreconcilable differences and mutual respect despite the decision to part ways. No mention was made of Marcus Thompson or the affair that had destroyed their relationship. The palace had managed to keep those details from the public, but Charles knew that the truth had a way of emerging eventually, especially when it involved such devastating betrayals. Camilla had left England immediately after the divorce was finalized, relocating to a property in France that Marcus Thompson had purchased for them. The last official photograph of her as queen consort showed her leaving Clarence House with 2 suitcases and a look of determined resolve that had been captured by telephoto lenses from across the street. She had refused all interview requests and maintained complete silence about the reasons for the divorce, leaving the public to speculate about what had driven the couple apart after so many years together. Charles had thrown himself into his royal duties with renewed intensity, using the demanding schedule to avoid dwelling on the personal devastation that threatened to overwhelm him during quiet moments. He attended state functions, met with foreign dignitaries, and championed environmental causes with the same dedication he had always shown. But those close to him could see the toll that the divorce had taken. He had aged visibly in those 3 months, developing deeper lines around his eyes, and a weariness that seemed to permeate his entire being. The most difficult aspect of the situation had been maintaining his composure during public appearances while privately grappling with feelings of betrayal, loss, and profound loneliness. Charles had always been a private man who struggled with the public nature of his personal life, and having his marriage collapse in front of the entire world had been almost unbearable. Every sympathetic look from staff members, every carefully worded expression of support from fellow royals, every headline analyzing his tragic loss felt like salt in wounds that were far from healed. But it was on a cold November morning that Charles received the call that would provide the final, devastating chapter to the story of his marriage to Camilla. Sir Richard Henley phoned with news that he delivered in the carefully neutral tone that had made him so valuable to the royal family over the years. "Your Majesty," Sir Richard began, "I thought you should know that Marcus Thompson was arrested yesterday morning in Nice on charges of fraud and embezzlement. It appears that he has been operating an investment scheme that defrauded several clients of substantial sums. The French authorities believe he may have stolen upwards of 20 million euros from various victims over the past 2 years. Charles felt no satisfaction in hearing this news, only a deep sadness for what it meant about Camilla's situation. "What about Camilla?" Has she been implicated in any of this? From what we can determine, she appears to be another victim rather than an accomplice, Sir Richard replied. Thompson had been using her name and connections to attract new clients to his investment scheme, telling them that the former queen consort was personally endorsing his services. It seems he convinced her to provide testimonials and attend meetings under the pretense that she was helping him build a legitimate business that would support their new life together. The picture that emerged from Sir Richard's investigation was exactly what Charles had feared would happen. Marcus Thompson had used his relationship with Camilla to expand his criminal enterprise, leveraging her royal connections and credibility to defraud victims who trusted her judgment. She had unknowingly become complicit in his schemes, believing she was supporting the man she loved while actually helping him destroy the lives of innocent people. Where is she now? Charles asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. She's been questioned by French authorities, but released pending further investigation. From what we understand, she's been staying at a small hotel in Nice since Thompson's arrest. The property they were living in has been seized as part of the criminal investigation, along with most of her personal possessions. It appears that Thompson had used her jewelry and other valuables as collateral for various business loans that were actually part of his fraudulent scheme. Charles closed his eyes, imagining Camilla alone in a foreign country, stripped of everything she had sacrificed their marriage to pursue. The man she had chosen over their life together had not only been using her for his criminal purposes, but had also left her with nothing when his schemes finally collapsed. She was isolated, probably frightened, and facing the possibility of criminal charges in connection with crimes she had unknowingly helped facilitate. Sir Richard, Charles said carefully, I want you to ensure that she has proper legal representation and that her hotel expenses are covered. Whatever else has happened between us, I don't want her to suffer more than she already has because of that man's deception. Of course, Your Majesty. I'll arrange for the best criminal defense attorney in France to represent her interests, and I'll establish an account to cover her immediate expenses. 3 days later, Charles received an unexpected visitor. His secretary announced that Camilla's daughter, Laura Lopez, had requested an urgent meeting. Charles agreed to see her, curious about what could have brought her to the palace during such a difficult time for her family. Laura entered his study looking haggard and exhausted, clearly struggling with the stress of recent events. Charles had always been fond of Camilla's children, considering them part of his extended family during their marriage. Seeing Laura in such distress brought back painful memories of the family life he had lost. Thank you for seeing me, Charles, Laura began, her voice shaky with emotion. I know this is incredibly difficult for everyone, but I had to come and tell you what really happened with my mother and that terrible man. Charles gestured for her to sit down, preparing himself for revelations that he suspected would be painful to hear. Please, tell me whatever you think I need to know. Laura took a deep breath before beginning. I've been in contact with the French investigators, and they've shared some information about how Thompson manipulated my mother. It's worse than any of us realized, Charles. He didn't just seduce her and convince her to leave you. He systematically isolated her from everyone who might have warned her about what he was really doing. As Laura continued, a picture emerged of psychological manipulation that went far beyond simple romantic deception. Thompson had gradually convinced Camilla that her family and friends were jealous of her happiness, that they were trying to sabotage her relationship because they couldn't accept her choice to prioritize love over duty. He had monitored her communications, discouraged her from maintaining close relationships, and created an environment where she became completely dependent on him for emotional support and validation. He convinced her that you were trying to have him investigated out of jealousy, Laura explained, tears streaming down her face. When she confronted him about the evidence you showed her, he told her it was all fabricated by royal security services to destroy their relationship. He made her believe that choosing him meant choosing freedom from manipulation and control, when actually she was walking directly into the worst kind of manipulation imaginable. Charles felt his heart break anew as he listened to Laura's account. The woman he had married, the strong, intelligent person he had fallen in love with, had been systematically broken down by a master manipulator who had exploited her vulnerabilities and turned her own desire for independence against her. The worst part, Laura continued, is that toward the end, she started to suspect that something was wrong. She found some documents that didn't make sense, overheard phone conversations that frightened her. But, by then, she felt so isolated and ashamed that she couldn't reach out for help. She thought she had burned all her bridges, that no one would believe her or want to help her after what she had done to you. Charles stood up and walked to the window, struggling to process the full scope of the tragedy that had unfolded. Camilla hadn't just been seduced by a criminal, she had been psychologically destroyed by him. Her affair hadn't been a simple matter of choosing passion over responsibility. It had been the result of sophisticated manipulation designed to separate her from everyone who might have protected her. "Where is she now?" Charles asked. "What can we do to help her?" "She's still in Nice, but she's agreed to return to England," Laura replied. "The French authorities don't believe she'll face criminal charges, but she needs extensive therapy to deal with what Thompson did to her psychologically." "Charles, she's not the same person who left here 3 months ago. This experience has broken something in her that I'm not sure can ever be fully repaired." Charles turned back to face Laura, seeing the desperate hope in her eyes. "What are you asking me, Laura?" "I'm asking you to consider seeing her when she returns," Laura said. "Not to reconcile, not to repair your marriage, but just to help her understand that she's not completely alone in the world. She's convinced that she's destroyed everything good in her life, that she's hurt everyone who ever cared about her beyond forgiveness. I think hearing that you don't hate her, that you understand she was victimized by Thompson, might help her begin to heal." Charles considered Laura's request carefully. The idea of seeing Camilla again, of confronting the woman who had shattered his marriage and humiliated him before the world, filled him with complex emotions. But stronger than his anger and hurt was a deep compassion for someone who had been so thoroughly deceived and manipulated. "Tell her that when she's ready, when she's had time to settle back in England and begin working with therapists, I'll meet with her," Charles said finally. "Not as her former husband, but as someone who cares about her recovery and healing. She needs to know that Marcus Thompson doesn't get to define the rest of her life, that there are people who still see the good person she was before he got his hands on her." Laura's relief was visible as she thanked Charles and prepared to leave. As she reached the door, she turned back to him one final time. "Charles, I want you to know that even at the worst of it, even when she was most under his influence, she never stopped loving you. Thompson convinced her that love wasn't enough to overcome your differences, that leaving was an act of kindness that would free you both to find real happiness. She thought she was setting you free as much as herself." After Laura left, Charles sat alone in his study, contemplating the ruins of what had once been the greatest love story of his life. The woman he had married was returning to England broken and ashamed, the victim of a criminal who had exploited her deepest vulnerabilities to serve his own greed and ambition. Their marriage was over, their life together destroyed, but perhaps there was still a chance for healing, forgiveness, and the possibility that they could both find peace with what had happened between them. The crown still sat heavily on Charles's head, the responsibilities of kingship still demanded his attention, and the loneliness of his position still surrounded him like a cold embrace. But for the first time since discovering Camilla's affair, Charles felt something other than anger and betrayal when he thought about his former wife. He felt compassion for a fellow victim of Marcus Thompson's cruelty, and hope that even the deepest wounds might eventually heal with time, understanding, and the kind of love that asks nothing in return except the chance to help another human being find their way back from the darkness. The story that had begun with Charles finding Camilla's phone that autumn morning had reached its conclusion not with revenge or vindication, but with the recognition that some betrayals are themselves betrayals of the person who commits them, and that true love sometimes means helping someone heal from the consequences of choices that destroyed everything you thought you shared together.